the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. And if you're watching, you see the face of a great friend of the show, one of the smartest minds in NFL media. It's Robert Mays joining us from The Athletic. Mays, what's up, man?
I don't know. That's a very intense introduction. I feel like I have a lot to live up to now. I appreciate it, though.
All you have to do is be nice and talk football like you do. You know,
I can do those two things. Whether I can do them well is a different question.
Yeah, well, you know, that covers the friend part, the being nice, and then the football part. Well, let's see how it goes over the next however many minutes we're talking. So you were tweeting out a bunch of clips and watching and quite enjoying yourself watching the Commanders' offense last week against Denver. And then obviously this weekend happened. And, you know, and watching the tape back of that one, they played better than the score situation, but it just shows you, hey, those turnovers, pretty important. Maybe a reason that every analyst on television is like, they got to win the turnover battle. But when you watch this offense and compare it to Kansas City's offense, when you compare it to the Commanders' offense last year, like what are the things that you're seeing that made it so enjoyable to watch and that are maybe comparable to what Eric Bieniemy's, you know, been in the last decade in Kansas City?
I just enjoyed the way that everything was coming together in that Denver game, whether it was Sam Howell's performance, the offensive line, the amount of just pure juice they have at those pass-catching spots. There were a few moments in that game against the Broncos where Sam Howell was making decisions, playing on time. There was a backside dig he threw to Terry McLaurin within his progression that was like, that's good quarterback play for somebody in his fourth game. Obviously, the post touchdown to McLaurin is a pretty courageous throw for somebody in that situation. He hits a hole shot to John Bates at the end of the first half that even willing to let that ball go says a lot about where he is right now. So you're looking at a guy in start 3 in a new offense, and it was pretty encouraging stuff. Even the offensive line. You know, Charles Leno had some tough moments in that game, but I thought everyone else played pretty well against the Broncos. It's a new group with guys in new spots, a couple new starters. They're passing off stunts well. The screen game is beautiful. So I'm sitting back being like, all right, I can get on board with this. I'm actually pretty excited about what this could look like. And then they get blanked, essentially, by the Bills on Sunday. And that's the NFL. And that's the NFL 3 weeks in. You can look at a team and be really excited about where they are, and then they run into the wrong opponent at the wrong time. You get more context about the teams they play. Like the Broncos, we didn't know what the Broncos defense was potentially, and then they get 70 hung on them by the Dolphins. So it's really hard to understand exactly what you're looking at when we're still in September, but I still think there have been enough flashes from Washington's offense where the arrow was pointing up, especially when you compare it to previous years.
So let's put Howell in context, right? 4th career start, the Buffalo game. When you look at him, and like, let's take the draft status off the board, right? When you look at him as a young quarterback and compare him to other young quarterbacks, how does he stack up and where he is in his current level, the progression, all those things?
You can see the youth in some of the ways that he operates. And right now, I think one of the things that sets him apart is also one of the things that's holding him back. He's willing to hang on to the ball. He's willing to take some chances. He's willing to push it. And that gets him in trouble. Even when we were talking about on our show, the reasons to be excited about Washington's offense, it came with a caveat of, man, he's got to get rid of the ball. Took 16 hits through the first 2 games, 10 sacks through the first 2 games. That is not sustainable. You can't hang on to it for that long. You can't have that sort of sack rate and be a sustainable offense. And it was the worst possible version of it on Sunday. You had a combination of him taking sacks he shouldn't and the offensive line getting beat up by a very good Bills front and a very good Bills defense. So I think that you've seen enough kernels to be excited about a guy that's only started 4 NFL games. The way that he sees things, the things he's willing to try, the way he's played on time within the offense every once in a while. But that tendency to hang on to it and try to get every single bit of meat off the bone every single time, I think that's the thing he absolutely has to work on. And we saw it really rear its ugly head against the Bills.
Robert Mays from The Athletic with us here on The Hoffman Show. Of course, check out the Athletic Football Podcast that he hosts multiple times a week. So when you talk about that skill, like some skills you look at and you go, that's not something people get better at. Like, that's just who they are. There's other skills that you're like, oh, no, that's coachable. That's fixable. Where does that skill set of understanding when to get rid of the football and kind of the timing of an offense, where does that fit on that spectrum?
I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I've said this about Justin Fields where I feel like it's an issue that is hard to resolve. You either have a feel for that space or you don't. What makes me a little bit more encouraged about Sam Howell's ability to come out of this is that I don't think he has bad pocket navigation. It's not like a Zach Wilson situation where he's bailing consistently, where he has no feel for that space. He's just hanging onto the ball a little bit too long. So that's why I feel like his version of this is maybe a little bit more solvable than other quarterbacks who've had this problem over the last couple years. Because when you look at Justin Fields, when you look at Zach Wilson, it's just a discomfort with that space when it gets a little bit dirtier. I feel like I've seen Sam Howell navigate the pocket pretty deftly a few different times over the last couple games. He's just trying to make something happen when it shouldn't. And I think that version, there's a chance you can come out of that on the other side unscathed.
How can a play caller help, and like what are some examples maybe around the league? Because I think one of the things I enjoy talking about or talking to you about is kind of getting perspective from around the league, because we get so, especially in local radio, we get so into our team. And it's like, our team's the worst ever, our team's the best ever. And it's like, I don't know, did the Commanders really have that much worse weekend than the Cowboys, for instance? What's worse, what the Commanders did against a really good team or what the Cowboys did against the Cardinals, right? So you have these moments of perspective that slap you in the face. So when you look at like play callers that have had good success helping young quarterbacks, what are some of the ways that EB, who's still getting used to Howell and learning, the personnel here, can adapt and perhaps make Sam's job a little easier?
I think that's a really good question. The screen game and the way that they've used it so far, I think, is a good thing to be able to lean on. Just give him some easy completions, and I think they've been pretty mindful of that over the first couple weeks. So continue to do that. And honestly, even beyond anything schematic, other situations that have reminded me of this, where you have a young quarterback who's got one particular problem, and it's often mindset related, just have a pretty frank discussion with him about what you want out of his play. I remember talking to Josh Allen after his second season. 2019, it was during his second season, and you started to see some of the steps forward. The intermediate accuracy had gotten better. The turnovers had gone down. His rookie year was such a disaster. He's thrown to Robert Foster, and he's on this rebuilding team, and there were some bad habits that crept up over that season. And really, one of the biggest things that created growth from year one to year two was him sitting down with, whether it was Sean McDermott, Brian Dable, whoever, about what the expectations for him within the offense were. And it was just like, Josh, you don't need to throw a touchdown pass on every single play. You don't need to make the biggest play every single play. Play within yourself. Understand what the rhythms of the game are going to look like. So just sitting down with him, going through 3, 4, 5 of those plays where he's hanging on to it a little bit too long, just explain what the alternatives are, what his mindset should be in those situations, the type of things you need to do with the guy who's only started 4 NFL games. So I think there's some things you can do structurally, but just mindset, approach, all of that, those are other things that you can tweak for a guy that's at this stage of his career.
Yeah, and I will say, it's a podium. What quarterbacks say at the podium is like a 1% reflection on the game, but like it does speak to something about where they are mentally. Some guys can fake it really well, which is why I don't put too much stock in it. But like, I just think Hal's super composed. Like the way he comes across is so impressive. He just seems to get it. He's got to get it when he's on the field. He's got to continue to grow and like make those changes actually when he's between the lines and the bullets are flying. But he seems to get it from like a intellectual level, which there's other guys that you're like, you don't really get how this works, do you?
There's one other thing I probably should have mentioned. I think that a team that's done a really good job of giving their quarterback outlets is the Lions. So the Lions have this kind of vertical play action passing game, but every single time they run one of those designs, they've done such a good job of giving Jared Goff checkdowns, outlets within those plays. So I think just having a few more, all right, we're going to have the tight end chip here, then just leak out into the flat. So this is the final read in your progression. Don't be afraid to get here a little bit quicker, because all we want is positive plays. So I think, again, if you can just get him on that train where it doesn't have to be everything all the time, as long as we're making positive plays, avoiding negative plays, that's where we need to be as an offense. With the playmakers that we have, with the way this offense is designed, the shots are going to be there. You don't need to chase them. So I think that there is a way out of this, even if Sunday was a pretty ugly performance.
Defensively, I think the Washington defense played well enough to win on Sunday, but they also got Josh Allen. Like, when you watch Allen play and compare him at his best to everyone else in the league, like where do you have him and what are like some of the plays? Like, I mean, the second, third down of the game where he's rolling backwards to his right, falling away, and he like hands the ball to Stephon Diggs 40 yards down the field. Like, it's him and Mahomes. Is that it? Is that the list? Like, how much of that is just Josh Allen being crazy good?
Yeah, I think that at his best, it's him and Mahomes kind of in their own place. Burrow is so good within the structure of the offense, and he's just not right now. So I think that we're seeing a pretty diminished version of Joe Burrow, and we don't want to kick him out of that conversation too quickly based on the way he's played over the last couple years. Justin Herbert is capable of some pretty ridiculous stretches of play, like what he did on Sunday against the Vikings, and just the way he's played for most of this season. I think Lamar has that level to him. There is a chance if they win that game, we're talking about Lamar's running ability as one of those break in case of emergency things that can get a team out of a game they probably should have lost against Indianapolis. So I think there's some other guys that can rise to that level, but consistently, I think that Josh is probably in that number 2 slot for exactly the reasons that you said. The 2 plays that stick out to me where you're just dealing with something a little bit different. The touchdown to Gabe Davis is like a 35-yard missile shot that barely gets about 15 feet off the ground. His ability to hit those within structure, there's very few guys that can operate that way. And then the exact play that you talked about. The way that he can make something happen when it's not there and can just be a backbreaker for a defense when you do everything right, him and Mahomes are the ones that have that feel to them. Or even when it's 3rd and long, you can't feel good about it. Go look at the 3rd and long conversion rates for the Chiefs and the Bills last year. It would keep me up at night if I was a defensive coordinator. So that's what happened on Sunday. You ran into a team that has a veteran defense that Micah Hyde and Trey White have seen a lot of things over the years. They're going to pick off a guy in his 4th start that's given them a couple tells. And you ran into a quarterback that is capable of those stretches of play. There will be better days for Washington against worse teams than the one they saw on Sunday.
All right. I have one NFL-wide question for you before we let you go. Robert Mays from The Athletic is with us here on the Hoffman Show. I have said I'm going to go down with the Vikings ship. Part of that is probably because I like Kevin so much. And I look at them and I just go, if they can stop fumbling, they'll be fine. We're now 3 games into this. Am I actually holding on to a Viking ship that is already sunk?
Well, what does holding on to the Viking ship mean? Like, you think they're going to make the playoffs this year?
I mean, well, now they're in an 0-3 hole. So that's a different situation from just like a pure numbers standpoint. Like, we're 3 of 17 in for them, and they're in a pretty significant hole. But like I think like where a lot of people look at them last year and so say they're actually not that good, they're lucky. I'm like, no, they're good, and I thought they would continue to be good. And that's kind of what I'm asking is like week in, week out. Like, I think they're a good football team, and they just can't stop turning the ball over, and that has absolutely crushed them in every single game this season. But are they actually not a good football team?
I don't think they're a good football team. I think their offense has some really nice pieces on it, and their passing game is pretty dangerous in the right circumstances. The running game has been the worst running game in the NFL so far. They're signing potential starting guards 2 weeks into the year because the interior of their offensive line is so bad. This Vikings team and this Vikings season was all about expectations for me. Look at what their offseason looked like. They're stripping talent and money away from the roster. The bets that they made in free agency are kind of contingency bets. They go out and get Marcus Davenport. They go get Byron Murphy on sort of prove-it deals because those guys have either been hurt or unevenly injured. They're young, so maybe potentially you get somebody at the right side of the aging curve. They can be a part of your core later on. This wasn't a team that was like pushing all of its chips in. Despite winning 13 games last year, I think they were pretty realistic about what their timeline looks like. The Vikings are not trying to win right now. The Vikings are trying to compete right now a little bit while keeping an eye on the future. If you look at the Vikings roster, even heading into next year, they've got a ton of cap space. That was Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's charge when he took this job. Let's clear the books. Let's get this thing in a reasonable place as we try to step into the future. Kirk Cousins is not under contract next year. The guys that are under contract next year, it's not a ton of them. You got Justin Jefferson, you got the 2 tackles, and you got TJ Hawkinson now under contract. You got Jordan Addison, who you drafted this year. It's really a young core and not a lot of guys they've financially committed to. So I think what they're really trying to do is let's build a culture. Let's make sure we have the right guys in place here. Let's have enough pieces in place where when we go get our next quarterback, we can set him up for success. And then maybe we are a team that can compete in 2025. I think that's more the mindset for where the Vikings are right now. I think that 13 wins last year was very misleading. So even if they're a 7-10 team this year or 6-11 team, I don't think the sky is falling because I think that was always on the table for where they were and what their aspirations were this season.
All right, so I'm going to leave my bag on the seat. I'm going to get off the Viking ship for now, and then but I have my seat saved for later.
I wouldn't be worried about this. I would not be concerned. Like the fact that they're running into all the bad luck they didn't get last year. I mean, this team they were 11-0 in one-score games last season. They're 0-3 in one-score games this season. Their fumble luck has been absolutely atrocious. This can happen. When you're a team that lives on the margins and you're just kind of sitting in that pack of everyone else, and you're actually probably further toward the back than you are toward the front, these sort of breaks can happen in the NFL. And when you have gained so much positive equity in the building, when you win 13 games in your first season, you can have this sort of year as you're building to where you want to go. That being said, having your first draft class be comprised of 2 guys in the top 35 picks that can't get on the field for your talentless defense, that is not a good start. But I think there are plenty of other elements of what they've done so far that when you look at the future, when you look at the horizon, they have a chance to build something that's pretty sustainable and pretty competitive over the next couple seasons.
Jets call you about Cousins because Robert Saleh has finally seen enough of Zach Wilson. Would you consider it?
If I were Washington, or if I were the Minnesota?
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes. The things that you have to weigh on, I think there are things you have to weigh on both sides of that. One, if you're the Vikings, what sort of message does that send to the rest of your locker room? And are you willing to live with that message? Are you willing to be this team that tells everyone else, all the veterans in that room, we're tearing it down this year. We still want you guys to compete, but we're not going to compete. I'm not sure that is a move that the entire building would get on board with. I have a feeling that would be a tough sell to Kevin O'Connell and a tough sell to ownership at this stage. Also, I think that you'd have to consider Kirk Cousins' view on this. I saw a couple people talking about this yesterday, and that him turning down a trade to the Jets would send the wrong message to teams in free agency next year. That to me is silly.
That seems very silly.
Kirk Cousins going to a Jets team where Dwayne Brown, who's 38 years old and can't stay healthy, is their left tackle, and you have this kind of weird vibe around their offense, and it's Nate Hackett, who we're not sure is good, and they're trying to navigate all of this stuff, rather than Kirk Cousins staying in Minnesota, getting to throw to Justin Jefferson in an offense he's very comfortable in for the next 13 games as he tries to build his value for this spring. I don't think it reflects poorly on Kirk Cousins to say, I'm not going to move my family and my career to this pretty unstable situation with the Jets just because they have an outside shot of making the playoffs. So I think this would be more about whether Kirk Cousins wants to go to the Jets with his no trade clause than the Vikings not wanting to let go of Kirk Cousins.
Kirk, if you hear this, the answer is never go to the Jets. Never, ever, ever, never go to the Jets.
If I'm Kirk,
I don't make the rules. Those are just the rules.
You saw Kirk's house on that quarterback show? He's got a nice little fire pit outside. It's fall in Minnesota. There's not a chance I'd be giving that up, and a chance to throw the best receiver in the league, throw for 5,000 yards this year as I look to cash in one more time in March.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And plus, he and Kevin, they have a great working relationship. And I don't know. I've said this before. I'll say it again. I covered Nate Hackett as the offensive coordinator at Syracuse when I was a student, and never once did I think NFL head coach or NFL OC. So that watching him on Hard Knocks and such did not really change that. He's just good at talking to Aaron Rodgers, who's also kind of a weirdo. Robert Mays, you can check him out on The Athletic Football Show for analysis that's better than what I just gave you. Check him out on The Athletic Football Show. Read his work in The Athletic. Mays, always a pleasure to chat, my friend. Thank you.
Great to see you, buddy.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.